Now, good evening, listeners and viewers, and welcome along to the history programme with me, Tony Browne from the Limerick Historical Society, and Tom Donovan. Tom is here. Hello, Tom. You're welcome along anyway.
Good evening, Tony.
And tonight we have another, I shouldn't use the word victim, but we have another guest tonight with us from Ennis, Martin Breen. Martin, you're welcome along to the programme.
Thanks very much, Tony.
Now, tonight we're going to talk about what excuse me, what most people call castles, but really they're not castles as such. They're tower houses, really. And we'll talk about how they came to be and who had them. And there's a lot of them in County Limerick, which we won't go into now. We stick mainly with County Clare, because Martin being from Clare, or from Ennis, will know a fair bit. Martin, first of all, you've written a fair bit about tower houses over the years now.
I have, Tony. You mentioned there are castles and tower houses, and which are the tower houses are actually castles. They're just a category of castle. You can call anything that's stone built a castle, but the actual typology, as to say, you have the Anglo-Norman castles, you have the round castles, you have the hall houses, and you have the tower houses. You know, there's several categories there. So mostly what I deal with is the tower houses, simply because the castle population in County Clare is very high in tower houses. We have a couple of other castles in the county, but mostly it's mostly tower houses. I have the numbers on them now, and I'm not trying to outdo you in Limerick or anything, but Limerick was fairly well populated with castles and tower houses. Like Westrup had 405 castles and tower houses in his study in the 1900s or thereabouts in Limerick. He gave us, what did he give us at all? 228, 210, and then he added a few more in latter years. The Ordnance Survey still only has 209 online. But like we would have had about 225 to 245, because you have a certain amount of names there that would be duplicates. Then you have ones that are lost, and then you have ones that you might only have one reference to it, and sometimes we find them. Like I found one there recently now down in Meelick near Clonlara, near Meelick Church. Yes. And there was only one reference ever given to it, and that was in 1495 when it was taken down by the Earl of Kildare, because that route from Limerick up into Killaloo, or we'll say going north from Limerick, on the back road, as you'd know the back road, you remember the old high road. Yeah. Meelick Castle. Meelick Castle, which was the castle of Finian McNamara, was on his route. And he didn't like that idea because it would be disrupting the movement of the English forces. So he took that castle down. And the only reference that's actually available for it is one that Weir mentioned in, what year did Weir write? In the 1680s or 90s or thereabouts. And it was the castle of Fiba. And asking Michael McMahon, who's a great scholar and a good man with the Irish, I said, what could that possibly mean, Fiba or Fiba? There's so many English spellings of it on the old maps of the area. But he said it's most likely comes from the pass, he said, Fog of Ballach. Clear the pass or clear the way. Mind the gap. Which the great thing about that is that castle of Fiba, the townland that it sits in, which is one of the smallest townlands in the county, is called Pass.
Oh yeah. But that's the Pass in Meelick, yeah.
So that's So that's just one.
Do you know exactly where it was? Have you got the site of it, or is that
the site is Michael McNamara has come across a few bits and pieces of stones. It's at the back of the church down in the crag. Now I went down with him once or twice, and the growth is too heavy to actually find it. Whether it'll ever be found or not is another thing. But the older people would say that it was behind the church, and they used to play in it as children.
Is it which church? Is it Catholic Church in Meelick?
Catholic Church, the newer church, yeah.
The newer church, yeah.
Sometimes I know if you're in drought, like we don't get too many, but I get a summer drought, very dry season.
Yeah.
You can. I found the outline of an old house which is long gone since 1840. Even with a drone, you can pick out the the outlying houses in
Yeah,
Drought.
you
And
can.
even
Yeah.
up in Newgrange, they found some remains
Oh, they
from the
found
Drought
some.
as well.
Quite an amount of stuff came out of the drought in Newgrange, yeah.
Yeah.
But no, myself and Michael McNamara have threatened to go back there now once we get out of lockdown. And
Is that Michael? Is that Michael in Sycamore Bridge?
No, the other Michael in Clonlara.
Oh yeah.
But that was just, we were just talking about numbers there in castles, and as I said, the ordnance are still only given about 210, and we have references for at least 225, and maybe there's another 10 to 15, and you have the likes of that one in Fiba, and you have one over in East Tulla, Ryland, and there's a couple, like we have visited, and we know of the sites of about 222.
Well,
I think is what we're at the moment.
Colin Lennon gave a lecture one night, and he said years ago that Limerick had the greatest amount of tower houses per square mile.
It has.
I don't know.
He used to be 700, I thought. He maintained it was up to 700 there in County Limerick.
Up to what? How many?
700 he maintained. There could be
no, I don't think there's that high. The ordnance at the moment gives 366, and Westrop gave about 405. So you're in the region of 400. Clare is in the region of 200, 220. Galway is about 300, 311. Tipperary is nearly 400.
The one that
Kilkenny is 300.
The one that kept people, most people from Limerick, I'm talking to County Clare, is the McNamara one, the one out near the Limerick Inn. Years ago. Yeah, Cratlow. There's three of them in the line there. There's that one. The line. We're into the second one. The one being done up.
Yeah.
Get inside. And there's a further one down in the bank of the river.
That's Cratlow Moor.
Yeah, there's three.
That's Castle Donald or Cratlow Moor. In a line. They were in a line. They were in a line, I'd say, to try and keep the Limerick people in check from coming in to County Clare.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there, because you want the kind of facing into Limerick, and but it shows you that the justice there. When you go out as far as what we know is the 2 mile lane, when you cross over the river, the Lansdowne Bridge, you are actually in County Clare, and they knew what they were doing, building those in a line facing into Limerick.
They did, yeah. But you see, I've been doing a study there lately on the actual castle populations in the different counties, and then we'll say in the provinces and in the townlands. And if you look at what was required to maintain a castle, with the entourage of people, and you had the workers and the people who would have obviously farmed the land and tended the animals, and you needed a certain acreage. But all the land in southeast Clare, where the vast population of the McNamara castles are situated, it's all very fine land, very productive and very valuable land. And if you look at the townlands in that area are actually averaging around 400 acres. Now, if you go to the Brent here, as they say, the badland of southwest Clare, and you're into McNamara territory, so you're going out towards Kilrush, Kilkee, Clonderla, and that's poorer country and poorer productivity on the soil. The townland sizes are actually twice what the townland sizes are. In other words, they're 800 and 900 acres. Some of them are up to 2,000 acres. But
it's the same. It's the same in Limerick.
Same in Limerick. Where have you had good land? Yeah. If you had good land, you had smaller areas that would maintain the group.
When the Cromwellians took over, that happened as well. That if you're near the city, you got less land. If you're near a big population, whereas you get down in Kerry, you get the Marquis of Lansdowne had 93,000 acres, 83,000 acres. What had he? A few mountains, you see, put in.
Right.
No good. The land was a little value. Whereas if with valuable land, you got a smaller amount. You got, if some people, soldiers only got 50 acres, 100 acres. You know, and
now if you take that one step further, and you look at the tower house and castle populations in the county, in any county, and you'll find that if you map those castles and you look at them on a dotted map of the castles of the county, the dense populations of castles are where the good land is, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in East Clare alone, you have like there's a list there that it's been under discussion for a while, in Royal Irish Academy list 24D10, which lists 61 castles in the McNamara area, and it lists the builders. So the McNamaras are actually credited with building, I think, 59 or 58 or the high 50s. And then there's a couple other ones that were built by the McClancys and who else have we? The O'Grady's and before you ever went into O'Brien land, we'll say.
But when you say they built it, did they have special masons or architects or to build a house? Like who
would have had masons? Yeah.
Oh,
they would have had masons, absolutely. They had to have masons. Now, I mean, that's a discussion for another day, but somebody, I came across it, I think it was Kevin Danaher that was talking about it.
Yeah.
About the masons. Now, you see the Gabon Sayer, if you like to bring it back to the older Irish, the Freemason, he seemingly had the freedom to travel wherever because of his trade and because of what he was doing. But you had masons, local masons, who were they wouldn't have travelled too far. They mightn't have travelled any more than 10 or 20 miles outside their own heartland.
Yeah.
So if I was looking at the amount of paperwork and the amount of measuring and trigonometry, for want of a better word, that would be required to make a plan and do the drawings for a castle for each individual stone, especially the carved stones. There was quite an amount of work involved there, and they had their own masons. They had their own ways of lifting the crown togal. Have you ever come across the word crown togal, which was a timber crane? So they had a timber crane, and they had a series of pulleys which would draw the heavy stones up to the top by means of using cattle or horses or whatever. So they had ways and means of doing it. But like the McNamaras themselves, they were probably the most prolific castle builders and church builders. And if you look at the decoration and the architecture on the castles, you will see that it's actually the same masons were doing the same work on the churches 100 years before that. Do you know?
Yeah.
So 100 years before that.
Yeah. And who lived, like when you said the McNamaras, were they McNamaras lived in the tower houses, or were they agents for the McNamaras or underlings? Like who lived in all those tower houses? Mostly. You said McNamaras, no?
Well, if we look at the East Clare area and the McNamaras, yes, they were. There were the lesser chiefs, not, we'll say, the likes of the main chieftains would have lived in the bigger castles, the likes of Dangany-Vigan. That was what they call a caput or a castle. That was a big affair. But the small standard castle, maybe 30 feet by 40 feet, they were the under chiefs and the lesser chiefs, and they had their own retinues. They had their own followers. But it would have been the McNamaras, and I've done a lot of tracing and tracking of the families over the last 40 years. What's his name? Robert Twigg. Have you come across him?
Yeah.
Robert Twigg was probably one of the greatest researchers, and he did a lot of research on the McNamara family simply because he married into it. Twigg was an Englishman, but he married McNamara from Ennis. So he died before he published his great work, but his great work is in the British Library at the moment. I think there's 11 volumes of his diaries, and all of which will talk about who built such and such a castle, and then it will go down through the lines. And if you look at the lines, you'll find that the references to the son and the grandson and the great-grandson and the great-great-grandson are all mentioned as coming from Kilkishen or from a specific castle. So to answer your question, yes, the McNamaras in general stayed in the area that they built in. They ran the castle as such, but outside of the McNamaras in those areas, you also had the McNamaras, their professional lineages, the likes of the McClancys, the O'Grady's.
What sources did Twigg use? Like, where did he get the information that he had?
All his diaries are referenced, and most of the references are old manuscript material. And some of them are Trinity College, some of them are Royal Irish Academy. You know, they're all, you can actually track and trace back to where he found his material.
When did he die? What decade?
He died in about 1918, 1920 or thereabouts.
Yeah, so he'd have got access to the archives before the fire, say.
That's what I was going to say. Before all this was destroyed in the Public Record Office, he was there. And, well, of course, Frost picked up quite a bit of it as well before they were destroyed.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of this has been recreated now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trinity are doing a recreation of the manuscript material that was, a lot of it had been copied and had been out in Europe and had been different libraries in Europe and America. And a lot of it is actually back online now.
But a man told me his father was around the time of the Troubles, and he got fish and chips wrapped in old manuscripts. You know, his father told him that at the time.
That's very
true.
There
was a paper shop.
I've heard that. I've actually heard that story, Tom. And the actually, do you know, while you're there now, I'll tell you a very funny one, and it's just pure coincidence. But something that was, I saw something coming up in a certain book dealer's catalogue for online material. And we all know who it is, but we won't say. And this is what, if you can look at that, 167 pages of the Thomond, of one lot of Thomond material that was over in America and was bought and is back in the country. And we put a word in the ear of our local library who actually bought it. So now we have one volume of the Thomond manuscripts back. You have the Will of the Last Earl is in this. A lot of the other material that's in it then are just copies of acts and stuff, especially. There's even copies of the Acts of Parliament, the Act of Parliament that allowed Henry VIII, Earl of Thomond, to dispense of his Irish lands, even though he never set a foot in Ireland.
I wonder, there's more of that stuff out there. You'd make you wonder.
It would make you wonder, yeah. It would make you wonder. When I saw Thomond coming up on it, I said, "My God, there must be something out there." And this came from America.
Did they give the provenance?
I have a provenance for it, but I can't really discuss it at the moment.
I don't know. Yeah.
But what year is it covering? Do you know what I mean? What year?
It's hovering around it's 17th and 18th century.
Oh yeah.
17th, 18th, and there's a little bit of 19th century material. I've got an extended loan of it to actually try and transcribe the will of the 8th Earl, because it was never actually transcribed before. And it's relatively easy to read it. It's not the old Elizabethan script. It's just once I can get time to do it, but with fellas like Tony Browne calling on your time, it's very hard to get time to do everything, you know.
Yeah. You could be doing
How do you find the difference between a tower house and a castle, so?
Yeah.
All tower houses are castles, Tony.
No,
but all castles aren't tower houses.
Bunratty to me is a castle, right?
Sorry?
Bunratty is a castle. Drummond is a castle. But how can you call that building that one outside the Limerick Inn a castle?
The one at the Limerick Inn, that's the Cracklow Castle.
Yeah.
That's what's known as the classic tower house style. And if you look at the plans and the sizes and the layout of the rooms, the chambers, the stairs, they're all almost like you took them off a plan for building a bungalow. They're very similar.
Was there a set plan for those tower houses?
It had to be. Yeah. Well, it's not. I don't believe that it's an accident that they're all so similar.
Yeah.
But like what they're saying is, and some of the academics now and the castle experts at the moment, the likes of Tyga O'Keefe and Rory Sherlock and David Sweetman and all those are saying that the earlier castles, which were likely copied or influenced by European style castles, and there are tower houses in Europe, because there was great trade in the 15th, 14th and 15th, 16th century from especially from France to Ireland, and not specifically through England to Ireland. But Scotland also had these towers, and that's Westrop's put his
But you see that's in
keep
Scotland.
tower.
Yeah. You'd see programs now from Scotland, and you'd see these we call them again tower houses in the middle of nowhere. Some of them even out in the middle of a lake. There's the odd one or two.
Yeah, we have them here. We have them here as well, Tony. In Clare, we have castles built on islands. I think last count was about 6 of them.
Is there?
Castle Dermot, Castle Bawn over in Lough Derg, King Turlock's Castle above in Chiquin Lake, Knockalock Castle in Knockalock Lake. We have castles on islands, yeah.
Yeah. So, at least they had a bit of security, hadn't they? They weren't worried about anyone coming out.
They had an added layer of security in that there was a water. But now the strange thing about it is there's actually causeways to 2 of those castles. But of course, if you didn't know where the causeway was, you didn't know how to get to it. So they had, well, when you mentioned defence, like they were built with defence in mind, because you had a pretty unstable era in Ireland. Like the Tower House era is probably from about early 1400s, to say maybe 1450 to 1550, that 100-year period. Now they were building tower houses. I did radiocarbon dating there for a project in 2017, and I radiocarbon dated 20 castles, tower houses. They were all tower houses, and the dates that came in, some of them were extremely early, which brings us back to the hall houses. But I'll come back to that. But we'll say I got some dates like Danganny now came in at what we were expecting, which was the very late 1200s, and the castle date range for Danganny is 1298 to about 30. There's about 100-year span, about 1380.
Where's that? Whereabouts? Where's that?
That's about 4 kilometres northeast of Quinn.
Oh, near Quinn, yeah.
That's McNamara Castle, was it?
That was a head castle. That was that was the bottom.
And how? Tell us, how do DNA kind of does my? I can't do DNA. But
I can't. I can't.
How do you radiocarbon in a castle?
Oh, you radiocarbon.
How did you carbon it?
If we have we got 2 hours, Tony, and I'll go through the radiocarbon.
The Ladybird version. The Ladybird version will do us.
Ladybird version. Radiocarbon dating. You mentioned DNA there. I don't go near it because there are experts, and you were talking to one today, Paddy. But I mean, that's a very, very, very deep study. The DNA. The radiocarbon is radiocarbon dating was discovered by a guy called Willard Libby in 1940s or thereabouts. Now it has come on in leaps and bounds scientifically, in that we can actually do carbon dating on to a much finer degree now than Libby could have done in 1940, because he was doing it manually. Now they have invented and developed newer machinery which actually does the count. Like to radiocarbon date something, basically the Ladybird version of it is you have to get something that was alive at some stage. That's that's the kernel of it. Something that was alive at some stage. So if we got a bit of Tony Brown's ear,
I'm just thinking that now to myself. We
could radiocarbon date it, absolutely. But the thing about radiocarbon dating something, and what we say is we can only radiocarbon date an organic sample, something that was alive. So once that something is dead, be it a person, a tree, an animal, a flower, once the basic principle of radiocarbon dating is that while we are alive, or while trees are alive, or animals, or whatever, that we assimilate the carbon dioxide in the air into us, and carbon dioxide is only a small proportion of air. But the carbon dioxide that's in our body at the moment is exactly the same as the carbon dioxide that's outside in the air and in the air all around us. And within that carbon dioxide, there's what you call an isotope of carbon. An isotope is just a big word for a different variety of carbon. So there are different varieties of carbon, and what we measure in radiocarbon dating is the carbon-14. So it's known as C14 or radiocarbon dating. And the principle of the whole thing is that while you're alive, you have radiocarbon in you. When you die, the exchange no longer occurs within you or within the tree or within the whatever. And it actually starts to decay at a very constant rate, and it's known as the rate of radioactive decay. And the carbon has a half-life of almost 5,000 years. In other words, the amount of carbon in your body, if you died tomorrow, half of it would still be there in 5,000 years. And in another 5,000 years, a quarter of it would be there. So basically, the radiocarbon dating process is counting the amount of radiocarbon atoms still within the sample. That's what it is.
If I said to you, can you carbonate that castle? What would you look for? A dead plant in the castle?
The great thing about tower houses is that all the vaults were sprung or built on wicker mats.
All right.
So the wicker mat was put up on a timber superstructure. So your first thing was your corbels, which corbels are still sticking out of the walls. You put the long planks of wood on them. You built a superstructure over that, and on top of that you put your wicker, and the wicker was nearly always hazel rods. On top of that, then you put your wet mortar, and onto that then you slotted your stones down. So once the mortar dried, you took away the superstructure and the vault tightened. But underneath the vault, at the bottom part of it, and it's still there today, are the twigs of hazel. So that's what I'd be looking for, is a hazel twig. And
did they use blood in mortar? Or is that
they say they use blood and horsehair. Now, I have found horsehair in mortar. I've actually found horsehair in castles in mortar. I think it was down in Clare. Yeah. Some castles where the thing about trying to radiocarbon date a castle is that you have to find a vault that's in some way protected from the elements, because the elements will destroy everything eventually. Whereas if it's inside in an enclosed chamber and you look in the ceiling and move a little bit of mortar, you'll find a bit of a twig, a bit of timber. So that timber was alive at one stage. So basically, all you're doing is you're saying, and the thing about the twig being alive is that you're using very small little pieces. Do you know what I mean? Only the width of my finger. Yeah. You're not carbon dating a big tree trunk of an oak tree that could have been 600 years old when it was cut.
Yeah.
Most likely the saplings that were used for the vaults of the castles were probably a year to two.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So what got you interested in tower houses? I mean, apart from a madness.
A madness, really. It's a kind of a sickness, and I think there's somebody bringing out a cure for it. It'll require people to be locked up. You have to be locked up.
You get the cure for the COVID quicker, I'd say.
You would. Yeah.
No, but I mean, was there one you picked on to look at, or like how did you?
I tell you, I always had an interest in the late medieval stone buildings, either churches or castles. And the churches, I suppose you could probably shove 200 years earlier onto the whole thing, and then we're looking at a period of maybe 600 years. And what I found interesting was the similarities between the churches and the castles in their architecture, the windows, the doors. But when you investigate and research into it, you'll find it was the same people were doing them, and that it transferred over 100 years or maybe 150 years, and suddenly started appearing on the tower houses. Now, the tower houses themselves, according to some of the academic experts, are the result of a development in what's called a hall house. Tom Deely is one. Dangan Vigan is a hall house. And a hall house, compared to a castle or a tower house, the academics are still not in full agreement yet. But basically, to make a long story short, the hall house was the precursor of the tower house, and they were just maybe 100 years earlier, but they developed and became what we know today as tower houses. What we classify as tower houses, like when people were living in these castles, they didn't call them tower houses. The word tower house actually only appeared in, I think it was Henry Parker put it into use in 1860. First, in his lecture in 1860, he was describing what we now call tower houses, and he used the term. It was never used before that. Hall has been used. The hall has been used.
Did they have a curtilage like a castle? Did they have, say, workers' houses around them? Or,
yes.
Like, was there a settlement or a community around the tower houses?
You could say there was a village around each one.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
A village of self-sufficient people in an area that would be enough to give that self-sufficiency to the entourage of whatever size of the chief. I mean, the chief might have had, he could have had 10 soldiers. He could have had 1,500 soldiers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It depended on how powerful he was. But basically, each of the little tower houses that we're looking at today, they were all settlements, like a little village, and they would have had their farrier and their blacksmith and their stonemason and their carpenter, and of course they had the professional lineages then, the likes of the Brehons, and they had their own castles, the Brehons, and the likes of the McClancys and those. Like, they're credited with building, I think in my count, they have eight castles in tower houses, we'll say, within the county, credited to their construction. There's 2 in Shannon, down at Urlanmore, Beg. There's actually 3. Smithstown, what we call Smithstown South, because there's a Smithstown in North Clare as well. And Smithstown Castle is in Smithstown Industrial Estate. One wall is left. That was the McClancy Castle. And these guys were the powerful Brehons, or the entourage of the Gaelic lord at the time, all of which went with the wind. All these professions went with the wind once the English laws once the Tudor conquest came in, and once the O'Briens or whichever the Clan Rickards, once they signed up to say yes, we'll go with this new legal system, that finished. That was the end of the Bretons and the scribes and the bards and the entourages. And I was reading something there lately, and it came to such a degree of change that some of the there are records of the family that would have been the powerful owning family of the castle. They actually eventually had to put their land into mortgage to survive, because they could no longer claim taxes and claim their 5% or 10% or whatever. Do you know what I mean? If a worker had 10 acres, then he gave 2 bags of spuds to the lord, and that was grand. Do you know what I mean? But the Gaelic lords lost the ability to be able to do that after the Tudor conquest, which was basically after 1543, when the O'Briens signed over in Greenwich to give up the kingdom of Thomond and become the Earl of Thomond. And then, sure, I mean, that, you know yourself, that brought in an awful amount of bloodshed, because what that did was, in one fell swoop, it meant that all the clans who were in the past, they would have had their tarnished, and they would have had their election to elect the best person for the job. These people were no longer in power. So the Earl, it was primogeniture at the time. The Earl's son was going to be the next Earl, and his son was going to be the next Earl, which ruled out all of the extended families, the entourage, the extended families. And it changed the Irish legal system and the Irish land transfer system completely after sometime between 1543 and say 1600. And people lost land. The Earls lost. The Earls didn't lose their land, but the chieftains lost, and all the entourages lost. All the professional lineages lost.
Yeah, what's his name was written about? Dahi O'Bruder. He wrote about that, about the change in times. He's no longer the castle at Springfield outside in Drumconnell, and the whole thing, he says, O'Bruder says that the whole thing had changed. He regrets it all, of course. These bards are no longer employed really as such. He writes about that.
Yeah, the bards disappeared, and sure, if you read through some of the English state papers, you'll find the bards were mentioned there and there was a price on their head, the idle rhymers and harpers. They were no longer to be entertained or to be entertaining and to be paid for their services. So, I mean, these people lost their job at one fell swoop. They lost their livelihood in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
So that was the change of the Gaelic order.
It was a terrible time, We don't talk much about it, what happened at the time. But I've read a fair bit about it now. So depression, really, when you realise
it's rough. It's rough reading. Like the great era of the Gaelic order, from maybe 1200 until I suppose we had the Vikings came in first in 980 or 900 or thereabouts. And they were no sooner gone than the bloody Normans arrived, 1169. Now, I have to clock up one for County Clare here now. In 1317, 1318, the Normans were decisively beaten at one of the major battles in Baiser-Rodie. You know, so basically, there was Normans still around, but they assimilated with the people. But from the end of the Norman era until the advent of the Tudors, you had the great time of you had what's known as the golden era of castle building, number one, but you had the great time and era of the Gaelic chieftains and the Gaelic clans. And because England wasn't really concerned with Ireland at the time, they had the War of the Roses and they had one or two civil wars in their own country, and then they had some foreign. They were trying to get back some land in France, etc. So Ireland was left alone for that period, maybe 200 years, and in that 200 years, all our castles sprung up. Do you know? So it was a great time for Ireland. But as Tony says, at the end of it was very sad because it's one fell swoop, the whole lot finished.
Martin, in the period you have studied the tower houses, has many of them been destroyed or lost? I say, like, we were down in Colemanstown Castle now in 1995, I think, and there was I saw stones being taken away for stone walls out of the corners and like that kind of destruction, undermining.
What castle was that, Tom?
Colemanstown Castle down in
Labashida. Down in Labashida. Yeah, that was very much undermined with what we call robbing out of stones, and always this what they seem to take is the cornerstones and the easy building stones, which meant they wouldn't have to cut them again. But even since we started building, since we started studying the castles in the last 30 or 40 years, God, I could name a half a dozen in our county alone that have fallen. Like Kilkishen. You can remember Kilkishen?
I remember that film.
I was up. I had taken pictures from the top. I was up on the top of that 3 weeks before that.
Okay. Maybe you caused it. Maybe you knocked it down.
No, Tom, I wasn't as heavy at that time. I had no weight at all in me. And Milltown Castle over in Tulla fell around the same time. Maybe 10 years before that. Cragmoher Castle out in Corofin has almost disappeared. You know, like since we started doing them, there's so much in investigation.
But that's by natural cause, we say, the elements. But I know in Limerick there was a castle knocked, and the owner happened to be in hospital. He had a good alibi, but it was knocked down. And his son was building a house at the time, and he wanted to build a stone wall. Yeah, very handy. But I mean, that kind of, like, he was brought to court and all, but nothing happened of it. You know, you know, if you want to defy the law, you can do it. You know, and it's a pity. You know,
it's a pity, and people aren't afraid of it any longer. You know, there's a lot of there's a lot of people that have castles on their land, and they're quite proud of them.
Yeah, and they should be.
And there should be. And even in County Clare alone now, I think the count at the moment for restored castles is 18, I think. So we'll say you have nearly 20, which is of 200, is 10%.
Yeah.
So 10%, almost 10% of the castles, maybe 8% of the castles in the county are back. Like you mentioned, the one below in Cratloe Keel, which Joe Kinahan has done up. The phase 1 is finished, and he's gone ahead with phase 2 on it. There have been a few people trying to get Cratloe Mile Castle, the one on the road, see could they renovate that. Castle Bawn over in Lochderg has been completely.
Is that the one John Madden was talking about?
We heard about one last week with John Madden. It's above on the lake shore. On
the lake shore, Castle Bawn. Simon's Castle, Simon Flannery's castle.
The Cody bought it.
Pat Cody.
Pat Cody, yeah.
That's right.
That one out, John Madden was on about that.
Yeah, he did it up there about 10 or 15 years ago. I remember photographing it before it was done. The destruction of that castle was due to the police, because that had become an illicit brewery.
Oh, he said that, yeah.
Yeah, they were actually making gin on the island. So there was a big siege, and they eventually brought cannon down and or guns or whatever, and blew it, you know. And then Simon Flannery lived in it, and his life, he lived in he lived in one little room of it, and his life is written up by William, or not William, what's his name, MacLysaght, Edward MacLysaght. Gave us a good description of how that man lived there in about the 1920s, 1940s maybe. He just lived a quite peaceful life in one little room of the castle, and the castle actually at that stage it became known as Simon's Castle, Simon Flannery's castle. Yeah, but and then you take Ballyportray, that was done up.
Yeah.
What's his name? Bob Browne did it up. Pat Wallace bought it in after that. Then you have up in the north, actually in North Clare, up in the old Corkham Road district, you had 3 round castles. Have you seen the round tower houses, the round castles?
Yeah, the most famous one is the one, of course, above in British McClancy's. The one above, looking out over
Donegal. Yeah, Donegal. Yeah, that was Donegal. That well, there were 3 round castles in.
There's one above the top of the one, isn't there? Newtown.
That's one. You have 2 of the 3, Tony. You have 2. You have 2 picked out there now. So you have Dún MacPhillam. You have Newtown, which is the College of Art, Burden College of Art, both built by the O'Connors. And then you also had a 3rd one called Faunaruska, which is just over the head of, do you know O'Donoghu's there in Fenor?
Yeah.
Up in the hill. That's another castle that has fallen since we started the survey. And I took the photographs of that in about late 70s. And that fell in 2 or 3 lots. Orlandmore, actually down in Shannon, is another one that has fallen since we.
Orlandmore, yeah.
And there's nothing in Orlandmore now, only a pile of rubble.
Look, I remember. I do, yeah.
Do you remember it? Did you?
Okay, condition, like, you know.
Yeah, there was that was the one with the drawings on the wall.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot that now. Yeah.
The hunting scene, Sergeant Long. I think 1936 was it. Sergeant Long discovered them.
What about your man Andrews in Napogue? He gave us a great talk one day when he doing up there.
Yes.
He slides of it.
Well, there's another one that's done up.
Yeah,
that's another castle that was done up. Yeah. Mark Edwin Andrews. Yeah, he's passed on now, hasn't he?
Oh yes, yeah. But
if you look at that and you look at it in the size of that castle, so that was obviously a head chieftain's castle. That wasn't just a standard tower house, even though it does conform to the tower house style. It has tower house style typically is a stacked house. So you have the chambers one over the other with a couple of barrel vaults and a spiral stairs, small windows in the ground floor for defence. As you went to the next floor, they got a bit bigger, and the hall and the top floor always had plenty of light and plenty of big windows, and then your crenellations around the top. And that's the basis.
Is Bunratty a tower house as well?
That's I tell you now, Tom. Bunratty to me is a castle.
Yeah. I'm Bunratty Castle now.
I would too, but just as you were describing it there, I thought of Bunratty. So
Bunratty Castle has, you could almost say it has 4 tower houses, one on each corner.
Yeah.
And a big hall running up the centre with 3 chambers.
Yeah.
Now, Bunratty Castle, if you look at the Ordnance Survey or the National Monuments website at the moment, that's not classed as a tower house. It's classed as a hall house.
Mm.
I wouldn't agree with that. I don't believe it's a hall house. There may be hall houses.
Have you done work on Bunratty?
I wrote a book. I wrote the guidebook for Bunratty.
He's done a book on Bunratty. Where is the book?
I wrote that. I'm about 7, 8
years. Oh yeah, I have that. Yeah, that's
the guidebook. Yeah. That was the guidebook for the castle, because there was actually no guide. There was no guidebook there. It's a pocket book. You can shove it in your pocket and go around and so that's the. I mean, I did a lot of, outside of just researching the castles. I did a lot of that kind of. We'll say that's the Bunratty guide, and I did the Doolin guide. You know, Jesus, back in 1990 something. So because there was no walker's guide for Doolin.
Yeah.
I just walked the fields.
That's the castle. What's that in the front of that? On the front of that.
That's Hilary Gilmore's drawing of Donegal.
Donegal, yeah, that's the one I was on about. That Clancy's.
And Michael Russell is there playing his tin whistle in the front of it.
Lovely.
Crab Island here, and then you're looking over to the Aran Islands. Hilary did the drawing for the front.
Do you remember one time for an ad for butter? Do you remember it made it really
What was it?
2 years ago, about, oh God, it must be 30 years ago now. There was an ad in television with that for Irish, for butter, you know. And the
Oh, they used the castle.
Yeah, and it made it kind of very famous at the time. You know,
that castle has appeared on a lot of paperwork and brochures and advertising for the country. John C. Gorman, he was an American tobacco importer. He was a lovely man, a very nice man. And I called him several times now, and he was always welcoming. He died since. I know his family still have the house. But I asked him, I said, how come, I said, Donegal Castle seems to appear on all the official brochures? Well, he said they never asked me about it. He had not. He wasn't even asked, but to use it because it's a very picturesque. It's a totally picturesque.
There's another one just comes to mind now. The other one, there was another man living in this, Casey, the one above near 6 Mile Bridge.
Castle. I know Casey. Yeah. Ballymull Castle.
I mean, that's deteriorating as well now. That is. It's
going back now to the same way it was in the 1960s, and sadly, there's nobody looking to buy it. What should I mean? It's you need very big pockets now to buy a castle and keep it heated and keep it warm.
The thing is now, like before you could do a castle and you could do it whatever you like, but now you have conservation roads.
You'll be very limited. Yeah.
Right?
You'll be very limited, Tom.
It's on the OPW.
Costly, right? Sorry?
The OPW, it's on the OPW, I know, I said. And then lock you up for 12 months.
No, but even the conservation rules, like, you know, the expense, you have to, like, you can't just, I mean, go back to Frank Candy in Clarina, he plastered a church here and he got into trouble with Grenella Road came down and nearly had a heart attack. He made him strip it all down again and use the proper, you know, he wrote a book about it actually. About, you know,
this is the church,
how to, but it's
near Carrigogunnel. It's near Carrigogunnel.
Yes, Clarina, yeah.
Yeah, and he wrote a book on it. Frank Hanley did about the exploration of the what he did there and that, you know.
Yeah. But it's more about his mistakes. But he was honest in his mistakes. He did, you know, he started off meaning well and then realized that when he was advised by the experts. But no, my point is, like, if you're like anybody buy that castle now, as you say, want deep pockets because you can't just get the local plaster and plaster it, and you know you'd have to bring in special, you know.
You'd have to do hydraulic lime on it. Yeah. It's all very expensive now. Yeah.
And then you have the problem, like, you know, it's a modern castle, but Dromore Castle, they discovered with limestone, you know, that you can't, with dampness, you can't give out the dampness.
That was Godwin's Castle of Damp, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a shame. It's a beautiful castle.
Almost beautiful.
Architectural students should be brought in, children should be brought out to see that castle.
It's a mix of architectural styles.
Yeah.
A period of about 400 or 500 years. I actually found pictures of the insides of it before they took the roof off it. I think they took the roof off it. Was it McMahon's had it? Took the roof off it because of the race. Yeah.
Well,
I was passing through Clarina one night. It was late, and I had been in and out of Dromore Castle several times. I used to love going in there because it's a fantastic, a really beautiful place to go to. And I was passing through Clarina one night. Jesus, didn't I see lights on in the castle? I said, I wasn't drinking. I hadn't, you know, I said, am I having hallucinations or something? How could there be lights on in Dromore Castle? And all the lights at the wall were on. They were making a bloody film.
That's why I asked you when. High Spirits they were making there.
How long ago was that? Was it 30 years, 40 years? 30.
30 years ago, I'd say.
It's easily 20 years ago anyway.
Oh, geez, on 30, I'd say, Tony. Yeah.
Was it blind spirits or high spirits, Tony?
High spirits, isn't it?
Yeah,
High
sure,
spirits,
yeah.
I think. You're thinking of blind spirits.
It frightened the bejesus out of me that night anyway.
What's his name? What the fella lived up in Galway, what's his name? Hewson. His daughter is in it, Angelica Hewson.
Angelica Hewson.
Oh, yeah.
Mary Coughlin got that as well.
Is she the singer?
She's always talking about that. Yeah. But there's a great story when John Burman was doing Excalibur. They were filming late at night, and they were all dressed in armor and and swords, but they got lost inside in the field when it got dark, and they eventually got their way out onto the public road. And as they came out over the wall, this fellow coming home from the pub stopped the car and got out and said, "I'm never again having a drink," he said. All you can see was fellas coming out with armor out over the wall. It's a bit like you, Martin, seeing the lights on the castle.
And Laundry Moore, yeah, I remember it well. Oh my God.
I know we're talking mainly about Clare now, but even I know a few in Limerick that have disappeared over the years. Other small little tower houses, and they've disappeared. And there's been nothing about them. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I remember one in the Dublin Road. And
no protection, Tony.
No. Nobody cares really, It's like a graveyard. There are no votes in them,
Yeah. Well, we the same thing now with in Glynn. Eventually Bannersack got all the lime kilns listed, but the attitude was he rang the council one time about a lime kiln being destructed. The man said, "Sure, there's hundreds of them there. Sure, it doesn't matter." That was his attitude, and I think it's the same with the tower houses. The fact that there's so many, it kind of breeds contempt. Like there's,
well, it does.
there's plenty more there.
Yeah, I actually did a study. I did a study there because there was so many numbers for tower houses in the county, from a lot of different writers and experts and whatever, and the figure is about for the 32 counties now, 5,500 approximately, about 5,500 that we have records for.
What province would have the most, Munster?
Province will say they're not too badly. The one that has the worst is Ulster.
Oh,
Ulster's very, very poor in castles. Connacht is not great. Munster and Leinster would probably be the highest. I have the figures there now in a thing that I was working on for publication, so that'll come out.
Is there a reason for that? Like, I mean,
well, if you look at the productivity of the land, look at the height of the land, you will have no castles built on areas that take the Comeras or take the, moorlands or meadows will not have castles. The glens where there's good fertility, valuable land, you needed something to defend your patch of valuable land, and that's what they were.
Makes sense,
yeah. They're logical, all right, yeah.
You can imagine that the better the land, like the more prosperity, I suppose, really.
More prosperity, and more value. Anything of value, people will be looking for it.
Yeah.
So the land, as one old man said to me once about land, he said, land is about the only thing, he said, they're making no more of.
Yeah. I heard that as well,
yeah. So if you have good land, you're going to defend it and you're going to try and mind it. And that was really the job of the Tower House. And that 200-year period where people were actually doing farming and intensively operating their estates before the Tudor, we'll say that era between the Normans and the Tudors, that 200 years was probably the golden era of the Gaelic the Gaelic system.
Gaelic
laws. A teacher told me, he was teaching a class one time, and there was a local family who were mad for land, and just mentioned there, and we'll say Kellys. No, it's not the name. We'll say a local family, Kellys. Any farm that come up, they bought it up for their sons and everything. So they were just in class one day. The teacher said, "Can you grow grass on the moon, or could you grow things on the moon?" And the young fella says, "No, because if you did, my dad said the Kellys be up there." They were so mad for land.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying that. It's like the
that's kind of incorporated into the house. It's out in Castleguard, out in the Palace Green, and there's a fine tower house inside. And they got the owners at the time, got the Payne brothers to come out and build a complete barn around it, and a lovely archway going into a kind of a modern house, modern for 1820. And there's a tower house at the side that was incorporated into the house, and it's a very good condition.
It's not an uncommon thing, the incorporating into houses and into, like, if you're familiar with the Old Ground Hotel in Ennis.
Yeah.
Well, that has a tower house incorporated into it.
This is.
Yeah, and if you look at Ennis Diamond, the Falls Hotel, that was Ennis Diamond Castle, and the castle is actually, as you go up the steps on the right hand side, all that right hand side of the building is the castle. We measured it years and years ago, and the walls are the standard 2.5 meter thick walls, and there's actually a little late medieval window halfway up, even though it's painted, and you'd have to be looking for it. But I think there's about 8 castles incorporated into houses. Donegrog, where you were talking about, Tom, down in Labashida, you mentioned Colemanstown Castle. Not far from that is Donegrog. Donegrog is kept the entire tower house and just built up and built out. So it went out and up, and the tower house is there in the middle. So
is there? You mentioned about villages and communities around towers. Was there chapels or churches nearby?
Chapels of ease.
Right?
There would have been chapels of ease in some places.
Yeah, but there wouldn't be any. There wouldn't be any church as we like a church for the. Yeah. Not specifically associated with the. If you'd need to plan and plot the maps for the churches and for the castles. It's an exercise I haven't done, but from visiting the castles, there's very few of them that have a church very near them. So obviously people travelled, but some of them did have what was a chapel within the tower house. Yeah.
No, they had their own. They had their own in-house room, and maybe to the travelling priest. He was hardly living with them, I don't believe.
One of now, that's what's the house owned by the Martins? Can't think of the name of it now this minute. Where the castle is incorporated, and there's a church within that tower house. Still on the right, and they're hidden in the back. That house in there.
Bunratty has a chapel as well, sure.
That's it, yeah. Because although the one again, I'm getting back to the one again in Cracklow. Do you remember? I never knew that church existed. Is it St. James's inside there?
St. John's.
St. John's.
St. John's,
yeah. A big festival. There used to be a pattern there. I never knew that.
That's the exception rather than the rule now, to have a castle with its own chapel. But you see, St. John's goes back to earlier medieval times. Back at St. John's Well is in 2 fields over from there.
Yeah.
So you had the pattern. You had the pattern in for the well more so than for the church. And I was reading, actually, a very interesting read is if you look at the online 1930s schools projects. Where they got the stories at the time in 1930 from the old people. So you're probably going back to the famine or just after the famine. But the story about the pattern in St. John's Well was very good, in that everything would start off very religious and very cold and sober, and they went around saying their prayers. But by night they were kicking the daylights out of each other, because there was always plenty of drink came, and nearly all the patterns had a late night party and a drink. No more so than you would at a wake. But more often than not, at St. John's down in Cracklow, they ended up in fisticuffs.
Yeah. But that was because fellas were coming up from Kuna.
Probably, causing trouble. You know them, Tony. You know them.
I do. I know good through them. I do. You know. But like that. But I never knew that church even existed till that night I went in with you. And I never knew. We came from the far side. I never knew we could go into that tower house there. And so many people have asked me over the years about that. What is it, or who owns it, or the one on the main road. And you never knew take notice of the other one inside in the field.
Yeah,
and
the third one then.
And the bank of the river. You never kind of notes to them.
You can see the third. You can see the middle one very clearly now. Castle Cratlock Keel.
No problem.
Because he has done the lime wash on the, and you see all the tower houses were lime washed in the past, and there was two reasons for the lime wash. One was because it was white. So if you had a big house, there's no point in having it there if you didn't have it white and everyone could see it for miles. So there was a bit of opulence there, and it was visible. But the other thing was that the internal rooms were all painted with lime. But you see, lime was a natural antiseptic.
Yeah.
Because you had, the amount of lice and fleas and general illnesses and stuff that would be brought into castles with vermin and, but every year it was lime. There were lime
even during the cholera epidemics and during the famine, if the family were evicted, they always and even in the jails and the industrial schools right up into the 19th century, they use lime wash to
disinfect.
It's a disinfectant.
Natural disinfectant, that's coming from the limestone.
Maybe if we lime washed our house, we'd have no COVID.
You want the COVID, but I don't think that.
Martin,
we could make money out of that one.
Yeah. What reason did the tower houses come to an end? Was it fashion, or like why did they stop building tower houses?
There's a few theories about
decline of the Gaelic.
There's a few theories. One is the decline of the Gaelic chieftains. In the time, we'll say, as when James I came in and he decided to make the Irish more English. People moved from the towns, from the country. They started moving in the mid 1600s. Started moving into more intensive agriculture, horticulture, industrialization, mines and mining, and people moved away from the land generally.
Yeah.
But outside of that, like a lot of the castles, the military aspect of them, some of them were taken down. Some of them fell foul of the English officials at the time and the English soldiers at the time. Even one I was working on there for the other Clare for this year, O'Brien's Bridge, that was taken down simply because it was the castle, the bridge at O'Brien's Bridge had a castle on both sides, but because it was a threat to the English control, because the O'Briens could slip away out of the cut across into Ara, do their raiding, and then they could get back again over the bridge. So the bridge was taken down 3 or 4 times. There's a very turbulent history of the actual bridges at O'Brien's Bridge, and it was all because it's the military thing again. And once the military thing disappeared, we'll say at the end of the 1641 rebellion, and that, life changed. Requirement for defense wasn't quite as, and people got poorer.
Yeah.
But you had no chieftains. You had no pockets of Gaelic chieftains who had their entourages to be supported in their areas. And then of course after you bring in the wars of the 1600s and the flight of the Earls and all that, like the best of our people were gone.
Yeah.
There were still people living in castles, in tower houses up to. I have one there. It's probably one of the earlier photographs taken in County Clare in 1870, I think. Like photography only came into being in the earliest was about the 1840s, the Decay type, whatever they call them. But by 1860, 1870, there was the odd camera around. But I have a very early one of Dyce-Rodee where Nancy Hartney, who was a widow of an RIC constable, was still living in Dyce-Rodee Castle in 1860. People still lived in them for want of somewhere better. At that stage, they weren't opulent. They were cold and damp, and would require an awful amount of maintenance, and would require an awful amount of servants to be dragging timber up the stairs, up and down to feed. Usually, there'd be 2 fireplaces there. So there were reasons for them going out of fashion as such. But as we said, there are a few that have come back. We have nearly 20. In County Clare alone, and I can think of a few in Galway, and there's a few in Limerick. People do spend money, but you're into serious money renovate or restore a castle to put it into today's comfort levels. And as you say, the restrictions on it are.
And there was one thing I remember him doing in his thing. He wanted to try this. I'll never forget it. He wanted to try the strength of the walls, what they could take. And they put a thing across and put weights on it. And they went right down, the weight down, but they never touched the ground when they tried the strength of the walls. The weight stayed with them. They had planned that they'd stay something like 4 to 6 inches off the ground. And they did. They never hit the ground. The walls could take whatever way they did it. Don't ask me, but I remember watching this, that whatever way they tried the strength of the walls with these weights, they went right down, but never touched the ground. The walls could take the weight.
They were checking what's known as the lateral pressure for the walls, because that was a reason why a lot of the tower houses or castles came down. And if you look at them today, and you'll see that the ground floor of the wall might be 2.5 meters thick, and when you go up to the next floor, it might be 2 meters thick, and maybe 1.75 as you went up a bit further. But you'll probably find that the vault is sitting on the heaviest of the wall. In other words, the ground floor chamber, so that the lateral pressure of the weight of this vault, do you know what I mean? It's pushing down and it's pushing out. Now, if you had a vault up and 2 floors up, in general, they came down. If you look at, we'll say, Ballygriffy Castle or any of those, where they had a vault up on the 2nd floor, unless the walls going up were going to be that 2.5 meters, the lateral pressure or the weight of the vault pushing down pushed out the walls. And, you know, so there was structural reasoning required, structural design required for these castles. I mean, we were talking about the masons and what they required.
How did they do that? How did these fellas do that? How did they check the strength of the castle, the walls? You know, in 1450.
It's very hard to know, but I think it was trial and error, Tony, because if you look at where we look at the records and we look at the histories of the castles, the likes of some of the ones in Southeast Clare, like Troke and you know, Mount Allen and those, the ones that we know were built early, as in maybe 1450, 1430, 1450, 1460. A lot of those have fallen, whereas the ones that are 50 years or 100 years after them are still there, because they learned. They had learned, and it was a developing thing.
Martin, what kind of roofing had they? Were they thatch or were they tile?
There's records of thatching. There is records of thatching. They had obviously you had timber rafters on top, and you had what do you call the timber slate? There's a name on it.
Yes.
You see it in Europe as well. You still see it in Europe.
You see, I saw it in Switzerland and Austria.
So you had like the thatch was going to cause problems, because if somebody put a fire to it, they were in trouble. Do you know?
And then back before we finish up, one that just comes to mind now in perfect condition is Bargy Castle down in Wexford. It is owned by what's his name, Christa Borg, his mother. She lives in it.
Right.
But she did admit, she allowed us all into the house, you see. Maeve. What's her name? I can't think of their names. What's the family name again? He's not Borg. No, he's at the Borg. His mother, father, his grandfather was the Borg. She's Davidson.
Davidson, yeah.
Oh yeah. You're right, Davidson. Yeah.
She said on the roof. I said about it being perfect. We were right up on the roof, perfect condition. And she said, "My son paid for this."
All right.
But
once you mentioned Wexford there. Wexford also has a very high castle population of, I think, around nearly 200 for the size of it. Wexford was one of the highly Wexford, Westmeath, and Kilkenny, and Tipperary, and after that, then you have to come over to Clare, Limerick, and Cork. But outside of that, you know, we didn't have a huge castle population in other areas. And as I said, in the north of Ireland alone, County Down in the north has a good population of castles, but the others are very, very, very sparse. Maybe a half a dozen in the counties, 10 maybe. And
did you come across any evidence of mills, Martin?
Mills
in the tower houses? a lot of castles had mills, you know, for milling corn. And
Or would some of that have been done, Tom, by hand with the quern?
or the Kernstone, but in that, yeah. But if you had a village now, they'd usually have some sort of if it's beside a stream, they'd use
If they had
mill
good
wheel.
water, yeah. If they had good
Yeah.
water power, there's a good chance that there would have been. But like, somebody asked me that question only last week, that this millstone appeared out where they were doing up a building. Now the millstone was probably
Later.
6 or 8 feet across, and it was actually the top stone, because it
Oh,
had
yeah.
it had the
Indented.
indents for
Yeah.
for the drive,
Yeah.
and it was driven by water. But I mean, you'd want to have a lot of corn, or you'd want to have a lot of people in your
Yeah.
entourage to be using
Yeah.
something
And it's
outside
more,
of a
I think
quern.
the bigger castles like Listowel Castle that had.
Oh
mills,
yeah, but I mean, they were the likes of
Yeah.
Listowel Castle and those. They were
Yeah.
they weren't just a village; they were a town. And
Yeah.
incidentally, Listowel Castle, if you look at it, it's almost the same as Bunratty Castle, but it's
It is.
smaller version.
Yeah, I thought that.
Yeah.
I saw this door.
It's just
Listen,
a smaller
Claire,
version. Yeah.
This time we finished up, I think. And before, one question for
We're only
Martin.
starting.
This is
Tony, we're only starting.
No, joking, man. Going home. Listen, Bunratty. The famous question, of course, of Bunratty is why did they build it so close to the road? Why didn't they build it back further?
The motorway, it's close to the
Yeah.
motorway.
It's very close to the road.
The road wasn't there, sure.
That's it.
That was. You know why
He
it was?
wants to-
It was actually built on the estuary to protect the estuary going into Limerick. It was to protect Limerick.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So,
I
right,
never
so-
Yes, that's.
okay,
I mean,
so-
that question could have been asked 3 roads ago. There's 3 roads there,
yeah,
and
oh,
none of
yeah.
them were there. None of them were there when none of those roads were there, sir.
He knows
I
that.
thought,
Martin.
I thought he said he was going home. Is he not at home? That big place there he's living in.
Well, that's my house there. I'm waiting for the servants to come in a minute now. You know, when
I know.
I'll be getting cocoa for bed. I'll be getting Horlicks or Ovaltine when I go to bed. Anyway,
Yes,
Martin, thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks,
Oh,
Martin.
welcome.
Well, as another man used to say in another program, we'll have to have you back another time. You know, and I couldn't help but think when you were on about Dungora there above and thing, I was thinking Sean Spellisy was friendly with that man as well up there. In that castle.
Sean was, yeah, he was friendly with what was his name? Garman, John Garman, yeah. But he was a welcoming, he was a nice man. Yeah, he passed away there about 10 years ago.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, Martin, to thank you anyway, and to thank you, Tom, for coming on as
Excellent.
well. And now my big chore every week is finding this little. I'm not used to working a mouse, you know, but I'll be working it now. Anyway, I forgot to tell people who we were and what we were doing. Tom was gone anyway, and Martin, you'll be going on in a second. But just to tell people that we're broadcasting. If you want to see this, it should be up in about 2 hours. I will point this. I talk about that now, but it'll be up anyway. And we're the Limerick Historical Society. And tonight, again, and I forgot to say, I had Martin Breen with me and Tom Donovan. And you can go to learmedia.tv as well. And, oh, by the way, you're supposed to subscribe. I keep forgetting to tell people to subscribe. Down in the corner, there's a little button there. Subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. It's just to see how many people are kind of watching. But anyway, so good night to you all out there. And thanks for listening, okay? Good night, Joe.
Good night, lads. Thanks very much.